Welcome to Laugh, Cry or Die, a comedy disability podcast. How do you live life when your body's falling apart? We have no idea, so let's just bumble along together. My name's Steve Wilbury, and with me today is Naomi Strain.
Hello there.
She is a professional seizurist, and I'm just a hot mess of surgical post-procedure scars and hideousness. How's your week been, Nay?
Oh yeah, pretty standard, which for me is spazzing about the place a little bit.
So, for those joining us for the first time, Naomi is as I said, Naomi is a professional seizurist. She's very good at having seizure disorders, and
I'm like Queen Spaz.
a Queen Spaz, if
Yeah,
you
yeah.
one of the greats in
In
she's
history.
won 3 national seizure competitions.
I am very good at it.
She's
Yeah,
so
no,
good.
my week has been lots of people telling me, oh, you shouldn't do that. Oh, you shouldn't be off out on your own, which is a little bit of bullshit because every time somebody tells me to do that, that just means I'm going to do it even more.
Yeah, people. I don't listen to them or particularly like
People. That's why we hide away behind our laptops and don't go into the real world.
I prefer to interact with people at a distance of about 15 feet. COVID was fantastic.
Oh, it was awesome, wasn't it? Yeah.
I like some people. I just don't like humanity.
I like people on my terms.
Yes, if it's like a situation where it's been forced on you and you're having to really bend to those societal constructs.
Yeah.
It's a bit of it.
That's why before every social event I pre-plan an excuse. So it's like, yeah, I'll come along, but I have to be gone by such and such time. And then if I'm having a nice time, I can stay.
I think the word you're looking for is plan a seizure, because we all know how much you have over it.
That would be so convenient. Here we go. Bye.
If you like, all right, I know I have to get 3 seizures in this week. I'll do one at like Tuesday at noon and Thursday. But no, Thursday I've got that thing with Debbie. So
with Debbie.
Debbie, what a bitch.
I know, yeah. I'll always plan an excuse to get out of time with Debbie.
Ugh, she's the worst. Every Debbie that's listened to this podcast is now offended.
Yeah, screw you, Debbie.
If you're listening, get fucked.
Yeah, we don't like you, Debbie.
Oh my god, that's so mean. We're horrible.
Yeah, she was asking for it. She's asking for it.
She's one of those people who is like morally okay to dunk on.
Yeah, and her family.
And her family. I know a nice woman named Debbie. Like, anyway.
Really?
So for people who haven't been able to tell, Debbie's not real. We tend to take the piss a lot and have relatively dark senses of humor. So dark, in fact, that there's a medium % chance that I will have to cut one of our conversations out of this and chuck it on the Patreon, because
at least one. I think I probably know the one you're referring to, but
no, yeah. I was literally making up a Debbie. I was just talking shit.
I wasn't.
Jesus Christ.
And for the record, I don't know Debbie either. Now I want to go and meet a Debbie just so I can hate on her.
I literally don't think I know a single actual Debbie in the world. Anyway, now that we're finished slagging off people that don't exist, today's episode is going to be all about Nay, because she's so important with her big old seizures and her top tier St. John's ambulance usage.
Look at me, everybody.
General drain on society-ness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Way to go. So what are you going to tell us about today, Nay? What's your amazing life-altering story that's going to change us all?
I think I would like to tell you about my biggest psychotic meltdown.
Oh, what, like when you can't when you can't find a pen and you get really angry?
It was awful. It was such a terrible day. No, there was
find a Sharpie for 10 minutes.
I'm a very, normal, polite, easy to deal with person, really. I hope. But on one occasion, I was very much not that in a drug-related incident experience.
Is this during your meth phase?
Yeah, I mean, it was fun. There's always a downside, damn meth.
That's,
Maybe
you
they
know,
could
I
just
think
water
that's
it
that's
down a
what I
bit.
say to people who are struggling with meth. I'm like, it's just a phase. You'll grow out of it.
Yeah. Go on, knock yourself out. Have a lovely weekend, and then we'll talk about it. Right. Anyway, it wasn't meth that I
Right.
left.
Okay. So what's going on? What set the stage for us? Where were we?
Okay. So at one particular time, I was having far too many seizures a day. So they started to play with my
So
medication.
how many is too many a day before we get started?
It ramped up to about 5 or 6 a
A
day.
day. This is before the
Yeah.
medication changes.
Yeah. And so I was in really good physical fitness. It was like cardio all day long. It was great. So yeah, they decided to play with my medication to try and get that under control. But the thing is, a long backstory, they gave me a little bit too much for a little bit too long. And my brain started to rebel against all the drugs. I ended up eventually, after a long series of events, ended up in hospital for altogether 6 weeks, on the verge of death, and had people come over to say goodbye to me because I was dying. And it was all very weird because I was still sort of in and out of awareness, was conscious and interacting, but was not in my right mind.
So you were having too many seizures. They were like, take these pills, take these pills, take these pills, and you were just because you're
more drugs, please. No, I told them, you're poisoning me, and they went, nah, you're fine.
And then, so what was the inciting incident that actually got you into hospital?
Well, that was eventually, it was at the point where they didn't know why I was having so many, so they just kept me in because I wasn't functioning in the world. But while I was in there, they carried on playing with meds, and I started to have some weird behaviors and interacting wrong. Like, I wanted to go out for a cigarette, and they said, you can't go out for a cigarette. And my friend was around, and I was like, look, you can take me out for a cigarette. And she went, no, you're not capable. So my way of proving that I was capable was sending her to have a shit. And if I could roll a cigarette in that time, it was proof that I was all right to go outside. And she was very adamant that I couldn't order her to have a shit. I couldn't understand why that wasn't a perfectly valid, reasonable request. So, you know, I just died.
So, okay, one, not entirely unreasonable. This presupposition that, like, if I can roll a cigarette in a poop length, then, you know, then obviously I can work my hands and my fine motor skills are decent. But you just couldn't understand.
Well, see, the thing is,
she couldn't have a shit on command.
Well, see, I'd said to her, go to the bathroom, but then a wee wasn't long enough, so I needed a little bit more time. So a poo was, you know.
And you're just like, just go, shit, just go, just go, fucking go.
She wouldn't, selfish.
Fucking Debbie.
My friends, it's a criteria that I have of my friends. They should be able to shit on demand.
Now that is,
I mean, you're better.
Top tier. Yeah, no, yeah, I can, well, I don't shit, I empty my pouch.
Would you please empty your pouch on demand right now?
Well, no, it would make a mess, but okay. I can go to the loo and, you know, see what's built up in the last half hour.
I wish there was like a trigger word that I could just say and you'd shit yourself.
Well, that's the brown noise.
Oh, okay. Yeah, would that start you off? It's that sort of level of bass,
doesn't it? It's just that, yeah, it's that really. I reckon, because I don't have an intestine, if I heard the brown noise, I would kind of levitate, just like.
See, I've not listened to the brown noise. Perhaps I should play that.
What, just on the podcast?
Does that help you shit? Yeah, go on, everybody. Let's have a mass shitting.
Local podcast cancelled after 3 people shit themselves.
Yeah, can we turn the mics off for that? Turn the mics and the camera off. That's going to be a weird podcast. Just complete silence while everyone goes off.
everyone just gets a minute to themselves. Okay. So,
let's take a moment's silence.
Right. So back to Naomi in hospital on too many drugs. So you're starting to like lose the idea of how people's bodily functions work. That's the first thing
Yeah,
to go.
yeah. Yeah. And like it was visual things, like everything, my 3D vision just went. So I was full on hallucinating. Like I could put my hand through walls, and my friend said, "Come on, touch my nose," as a gauge. And like my hand went all the way through her face. I stared at a blank
So could you so
wall for
just
hmm,
let's
hmm.
hold on. Roll back.
Well, see, this is what we say. Like our things that go on. It's just like, oh yeah, this weird thing happened, and
Yeah.
I kind of forget that that's not a normal experience. So yeah, go for it.
Yeah, no,
Sorry.
because you're 100%. That's a really good point. That like, so many times we're like, oh yeah, I had that thing. And normies are like, oh my God. Like the first
Yeah,
like
yeah,
30 seconds of that thing would have been literally the end of their entire week. And we're like, oh, it's too.
yeah.
But I have questions, much like normies have questions. So when your hand went through her face, did you feel, could you touch her face, or was it just like not there, or was it just like the perception of it, or
I was apparently miles away from her. Well, miles. I was away from her face and to the side.
okay, right, so just in your ocular vision it looked
Yeah, yeah.
right,
Because
right,
it wasn't. I didn't have blurry vision and didn't have double vision. It was like looking through a kaleidoscope. So there was lots of sort of competing images that were kind of, they all fit together to make an image, but they were all completely disconnected.
mm.
So yeah, so like walking to the bathroom, my feet were going through the floor or weren't quite touching the floor. If I tried to like pour a drink, couldn't do that because I was just pouring water all over the little
So
table
like your
thing.
depth perception had shattered down.
Completely gone. Yeah, yeah.
All right, go on. So, okay, so now that I understand what's happening in your eyeballs next.
So yeah, so my visual was gone. Like, and I was like just hallucinating that people were coming into my room and people were talking about me. And there's one that I think I even now it seems really real, that there was two nurses and they'd come into my room in the night and they were stealing my things, and I was getting really angry that they were stealing from me. And I remember trying to pry the nurse's hand open, and she was saying to the other, like, kind of laughing, like she's really hurting me because I was trying to pry her fingers. But that made it even more realistic that she obviously had something of mine in her hand. That's why she was trying to stop me. And I remember getting really aggro about this. And
So were the nurses real? Or did you sorry, so you were hallucinating, they were hallucinating people, but then you were also kind of attributing real people to these things that you'd hallucinated? Is that what's happening?
yeah, yeah. I mean, looking back, it seems like even now, I think, yes, there were people in my room and yes, they were stealing because there was no other reason for them to be in there. But then my logical brain said, why would they be coming into my room and stealing? And I've got no one else to verify that they existed in the first place. Because I have hallucinated medieval people in sackcloth whispering about me, and an old man walking in circles around my bed, and a cat. And, I have, during lots of drugs, have experienced those things. So I can't 100% guarantee that this pair of nurses didn't exist. So
But
yeah,
you're
so I
only
was,
but the only reason nurses in a hospital would be in your room is to steal your shit. That was where your brain
yes,
was.
yeah, especially at nighttime.
Nothing happens at night except theft.
The nurses, they creep around the wards stealing from poorly people.
Oh my God.
That's
So side note, I'm gonna have to interject with one of my stories, which I can't remember if I
Mhm.
told this on the My Deal episode, but so I was in hospital in a ward with six other men, and because it wasn't a mixed ward, and they brought in this little old man who didn't speak very much English, but who obviously had dementia. And he kept thinking that the nurses were stealing his watches because he had like this nice watch that he didn't have on because he just had surgery. And he
Yeah,
woke up and he's like, these people who I don't know have taken my stuff. And at first I was
yeah,
a
I bet
bit,
they did. Those thieving nurses.
fucking nurses. What have the nurses union on us? And then they'll take our stuff. Um, and at first I was like, oh, poor old man. And then he just like kept going on about it. And I was like, God, just fucking shut up. But this man, who I think about at least once a week, woke up from his surgery in a room where he thought people were stealing his stuff and looked down and saw that there was a tube coming out of his dick and thought to himself, that's not supposed to be there. And I heard this noise for like half an hour at like 2 a.m.
Oh no.
And then finally the noise stopped and I was like, oh, thank God he's dead. But he kept and he got out of bed and then like trundled off down to find his watch or whatever. And I heard the nurse go like, oh my, what have you you've pulled out your catheter fully inflated. So for any people listening who don't know what I'm on about, so when you have surgery, it's hard to pee afterwards. So they will often put a tube up your wee hole, and then it's got a balloon on the end that kind of inflates your bladder. And this man
awful
woke up and thought, that's not how my dick's supposed to be. And he did something about it. And I wish if I had a third of his strength of will, I would probably be in a much better place financially.
Because you'd think after starting to pull that, you go, whoop, no, I shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah, when
to be dedicated for half an hour. Oh no!
After the first, you'd be like, maybe I'll just
press my call. Press my call button. Shan't carry on with this.
This seems like a terrible idea, but no, he just went for it. God, what
that's quite horrific,
isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, okay, so back to your horror stories. So you're in hospital, you're hallucinating, people are taking your shit, you're attacking nurses, and then what happens?
Okay, so this was at the height of the drugs. So I was in a ward, and it was a mixed ward, and I got out my cigarettes and was going to smoke. And the nurse said to me, you can't smoke in here. And I got very aggro because there were no smoking signs. And, you know, and she said, well, it's kind of, you know, assumed that you won't smoke on a hospital ward. So that started me off with the good and bad. Like, you're told to do one thing, but you want to do another. And so that's relevant, that sort of conflicting right and wrong. So the guy in the bed next to me was grinding his teeth all night long. And I realized that if the rest of us on the ward got together with our collective minds, we could cure him. And that seemed perfectly reasonable.
Oh,
and
right.
so because I am magic.
There are people that think that.
I was one of them for an amount of time. So I kept trying to get out. Kept trying to get out of bed to gather the forces. And the nurse kept pushing me back into my bed. Well, you know, they weren't aware of what they were capable of either.
Oh, right. So you had to inform everyone that they had a hidden power that they could use to stop this guy grinding.
Come on, let's get together. And it was kind of selfish of us not to use that power when this guy was, you know, obviously had this issue with his teeth. So I kept trying to get out of bed, and the nurse kept telling me that I couldn't. So I realized that I was going to have to do this super quick, get out of bed and get to him before she could catch me. So I waited, and see, this is the weird thing about this whole episode is things are so clear. And so I waited until she was, you know, looking the other way or whatever, and I leaped out of bed.
In a ward, attempting to marshal the forces in your ward to collectively pool their psychic powers to stop some guy from grinding his teeth. Yeah.
I mean, looking back, we could have probably used our forces for much better good. Yeah, it was quite a minuscule thing to focus on.
If you could, like, you could have been like, hey, let's go to the cancer ward. But no, it was all about this guy and his teeth.
Yeah, it's just down the corridor. No, let's start local. We'll start small. So, yes, so we were going to cure him. So I, because I was going to get stopped, I jumped out of bed towards his bed. I don't know what the poor bloke was thinking at this point. I mean, maybe he didn't even exist. Anyway, I got under his bed, and, you know, hospital beds have got all that sort of machinery to raise them up and down and that. I was amongst that.
Well, in the gubbins.
All of a sudden, yeah, I was in it, and there was no way anyone was getting me out. And so all these doctors and nurses, they came to try and stop this nutter from hiding under this bed. And I remember sort of crawling around, but then lashing out so they couldn't get me. And I was hitting like the blood pressure machines over and slapping their hands away and really fighting from getting out under this bed. And eventually they got me out. And I remember being on all fours with a circle of doctors and nurses, also on all fours, all looking at me. And it was like, in a standoff, like a fight. And I saw the doctor, I remembered his name was Hugh, and he was in front of me. And I said, "Hugh, you're an educated man, right?" And he said, "Yes." And so I shouted, "Well, you should know the difference between good and evil, and there's no such thing as God or the devil." Which I don't have that religious background as such or belief system, but all of a sudden he should have realized the social constraints of good and evil and God and the devil were nonsense there to control us. And I was very angry about that.
So you became a really like a very staunch, I don't know what the term, there's a term for,
Like evangelical kind of
not evangelical, but like more moralistic absolutist, where there's no good and evil are constructs, and all we have are actions and their consequences, and their consequences are neither here nor there. And because you're insane, this is what you decided would be an adequate thing after you get pulled out of the gubbins of a bed. That this is the conversation to start having.
I wanted to cure a man. That apparently was inappropriate. And that's just society saying that. And that's what I was saying about smoking on the ward, is that this rule's put in place that I can't smoke. Nobody actually told me. It's an assumed societal rule that I shouldn't smoke in the hospital ward. And so that was kind of, my mindset. It was basically me as a child throwing a temper tantrum that I couldn't get my own way.
Well, do you know what happens when you assume?
Yeah.
You make an ass out of some guy named
Yes, absolutely.
And
that's probably the guy in the next bed. That's probably
grindy teeth motherfucker.
Well, I feel sorry for this guy. This was all going on in the middle of the night, under and beside his bed.
Under and beside. I don't know which one's worse. I have this very vivid image of like the lights of coming in from the hallway, and it's dark in the ward, and you're just like on all fours with doctors around you, and you're like, "There's no God."
Yeah, I think probably one of my most attractive moments.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm slightly horny now.
As you should be.
As you all should be, dear listeners.
Well, I mean, someone on all fours crawling around your bed in the middle of the night, what's not sexy about that?
What? Especially when they start shouting about moralistics in the absence of God. Oh, fucking raging.
I'm turned on myself.
I'm going to have to pause the recording and go sort myself out.
No, don't turn the recording off. Keep it going.
That's a different live. Well, that's the Patreon Plus.
Yeah, we'll save that one for later.
Okay. That happened.
So I was shouting about God, and the next thing I know is they've got me stood up, and I have a nurse either side of me, and I'll just, sort of put that proviso in that their behaviour may or may not have been exactly as I remember it, because I may have been slightly delusional at this point.
A little bit.
So I'm standing up, and as you know, I'm quite short, and these two nurses were quite tall. So they were talking over my head, and they each had an arm behind my back, like being arrested, like how the police would hold your arms behind your back. And they were walking me down a corridor, and I was still arguing with them, like they were marching me off to somewhere, and how dare they? And they were talking about what to do with me. And there was, at this point, sort of doctors and nurses around them, because obviously I'm a violent patient, so they've got that support, and possibly even had security at that point, because I would have done. And so I was quite aggressive with it. And then they were talking about where to put me, because obviously I was disturbing everyone. And they said room 6. And at that point, room 6 became the room of nightmares. It became my room 101. And there was no way I could let them get me into room 6. And so then I started apologizing for my behavior very much. Promise I'll behave and I'm really sorry and please don't put me in room 6. But they were still marching me down the corridor and took me into this dark room. And obviously it would have been a hospital room, but in my head it's like kind of a broom cupboard that they'd walked me into. And
I just like the idea. It's like, where should we put her? The cupboard. Put her in the chokey, like from Matilda. Like that's where they put the patients.
Exactly. And I mean, like, I think that would have probably been quite appropriate with my behavior at the time.
I'm not gonna lie. I would have cupboarded the shit out of you if you'd been like scuttling around like an insect, denying the existence of God at 3 a.m.
The cupboard was probably the best place for me.
Would have been better.
So we get into this room and there's a mattress on the floor, because I spent a lot of time on a mattress on the floor during this whole time, because I thought I was going to fall out of bed all the time, because that's the thing, the floor was lava, obviously, when I was jumping out of bed to cure this man. That was why the leap had to be so quick, is because I didn't want to, obviously touch the floor as much as I can. So this mattress is on the floor, and they stood me next to it, and the doctor said, put one knee down. And I remember I put both knees down, and he shouted, I said one knee. And again, this may have been my brain. He may have just said kneel down. But I thought they were going to execute me, because I've got my hands behind my back and they're telling me to kneel down in this dark room on the floor. And I honestly thought I was going to get shot in the back of the head. So I'm begging forgiveness, apologizing for my awful behavior. And they put a hand on my head and pushed me forward till I was lying sort of face first on this mattress with my hands handcuffed behind my back, and told me basically to stay there and behave until the morning. In which I was, like I say, very apologetic. I was crying at this point, and I lay there. And I remember a nurse coming in, a nice nurse, saying, do you want a blanket? And crying very loudly, I don't deserve a blanket. Because I was, poor me. I'd realised the error of my ways. And
God is real. Morality exists.
I've let society down with my terrible behaviour. Only good people are rewarded with blankets. But that does remind me of another time in ED where, they put the warm blanket on you.
Yeah.
And they always have the loveliest, warmest blankets.
Oh,
and she put the blanket in, and my words and brain were a bit messed up. And I wanted to say, oh, that's nice and warm. But my brain didn't work. And I went, I'm in the microwave. And she knew what I meant. So it kind of... So, and there's a name for it. I can't remember the name for messing your words up and getting them all mixed up.
Aphasia?
It was lovely.
Is it aphasia?
Is it dysphasia?
Dysphasia something. Anyway, being an idiot, being a big...
Yeah. So I was an idiot with my words. So anyway, she offered me the blanket. I refused because I obviously didn't deserve one. And then after a certain amount of time, the handcuffs that I was in with my arms behind my back was starting to be really uncomfortable. So I tried to move my arms to get into a better position and realised imaginary handcuffs. Wasn't in handcuffs at all. I don't know if they'd told me I was in handcuffs, or I just assumed that I was, because I probably deserved handcuffs. So I rejigged myself and fell asleep. And the next morning, I woke up completely clear-headed. Like, no issues at all. I was steady, I was clear, I could hold a normal conversation, and I was very aware that I'd been mental and naughty the night before and was so embarrassed.
What did you say to the nurses when they came in the morning and you were like, so I'm not crazy now?
Pretty much. I was like, I don't know what happened last night, I'm so sorry. And because I was mental, I couldn't recall who was there apart from Hugh. But I didn't know who to apologise to. So the educated man. I mean, how big-headed of him? It's like, you're educated. Yes. Yes, I am. Very educated.
I have several pieces of paper with my name on them.
Yes, can we take a pause in this psychotic episode to all discuss how educated and wonderful I am? So yeah, I didn't recognise anyone's faces, and so I just apologised the shit to everyone. And it was mortifying, because like I say, I'm very sensible, I think. Um, but it was at that point they did decide that perhaps they should look at my medication after I'd been telling them about this constant poisoning, and they realized that like the good level of drugs in your blood, and I'm talking technical terms, is 20 whatever's the number of when they measure your blood, and it was 20 is the good amount. 50 is when it starts to get toxic, like when people start to die.
Mm.
And when they looked at my levels that night, they were over 100.
Whoa.
Yeah, so they agreed then, yeah, we are poisoning her. Yeah, that's fine. And they'd got me to the point of complete mental breakdown and pretty much death. But by the time they'd got those results back, I had reached the point of after that episode, because they carried on drugging me for maybe another day or two, of not being able to feed myself or walk. I couldn't see properly, and remember a friend had to feed me, and I was just throwing it straight back up again. So, and she's looked after people that have died.
Like
She didn't
hospice care
do
kind
it.
of stuff. Right.
Yeah, like relatives and friends. Like
Okay.
she's looked after them at home, like her father and stuff like that. So she's been at that very end of life.
Mm.
And she said that's where I was.
Mm.
Like she was doing that final care. Which, that's kind of weird thinking of that. But they stopped the drugs and I didn't die. And within, I think it's about a week, I was ready to be discharged. And it had been poisoning all the way along. And when I got home, it was because I'd been in for so long. I had to have a radio playing in the lounge because I'd had constant sound and noise around for the last 6 weeks. And I'd wake up in the night and I'd just drop my arm out of the bed, ready for the nightly blood, take my blood pressure and check my blood sugar levels. Because I knew as soon as I heard a noise, oh yeah, they're doing that. And so that took a couple of weeks before I stopped doing that. And my 3D vision and perception was still messed up. Like if I went to cross a road, I would be committed to the first step, that I'd take a step and then the next 4 or 5 steps were still going to happen. So trying to cross the road in front of traffic was an absolute no-go, because I just go, okay, the road's clear. Well, no, it's not. And so it took a good amount of time, and I had to have physio to get that balance and all that back. So that's how close it was to the end of my life. But at least I got a fun psychotic story out of it.
I think that's my favorite bit is you on all fours, surrounded by nurses and doctors, just being like, "What is this loon about to do? Like, is she going to shit on me? I don't know."
I will add another aspect to that. Okay, so in the bed, I'd been wearing just like a little vest top and knickers. That was my PJs for that night. And when I leaped out of bed, I knocked all the water and that off, so I was drenched. And because they were trying to grab me out of the bed, they were trying to grab onto my clothes, and I wriggled out of my clothes.
I think that's the best part of the whole story.
So when all that happened, yes, I was on all fours, naked, drenched, arguing about God. And God and the devil, no opinions. People can believe what they like, whatever, that's fine.
Unless they're educated, in which case they should definitely have opinions.
I'm normally so open to people's different ways, but at that point, no, I was right, they were wrong. So yeah, I was on all fours, arguing with the educated man, being frog marched down a corridor and being executed whilst naked. Yeah, like so no wonder she offered me a blanket. I mean, it's probably for her benefit more than mine.
She's like, "Can I stop looking at your fanny, please?"
No, you must look at my vag.
Behold its wondrousness. It glows with the light of 1,000 suns.
Now you believe in God.
Come to me, my sweet summer child. I think so a couple of things with that story that really I think ring out for me. One, that that point where you think you're about to be executed, like that's a fucking torture technique, mock execution, like that's a legitimate psychological scar that you still bear. Like just the idea that someone is going to kill me is so foreign to most people, unless I guess you live in Ukraine, sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
But like, yeah, that's such a big lump,
Yeah,
that's a
yeah.
big
And
knock on
and
the head.
it was very, very clear. It wasn't like, oh, I wonder if they're going to.
Mm.
That was the reason I was there. That's the reason why they were shouting as such at me to kneel down, and they were all behind me, and I had these handcuffs on because obviously that was the only reason
Yeah,
in a
room 6 is
hospital.
the execution room. Duh.
Yeah, yeah. And so I was already very heightened
Mm.
to the good and the bad, and these people were controlling me, and I was being told what to do, and they were trying to restrain me. That it was perfectly reasonable that that's what's going to happen, and that'd be why these imaginary handcuffs worked. I don't know if I don't think they told me I was in
I'm
handcuffs. I
pretty
think I
sure
just
they don't tell you you're handcuffed. I've been in hospital quite a lot, and it's never come up. But to be fair, I've never scuttled around naked on the ground at 3 a.m. accusing people of being educated. So, maybe they've got a special they keep in the back. I think the other
yeah.
one that's like for
I just
me,
want to say
go on.
on that point, on all fours and naked, just returned to the fact that I was on a ward. I wasn't in a private room.
Oh yeah, there
So
were.
the poor other people, there were other people witnessing this. I wonder what the heck was going through their minds while this was going on. They should have joined me. They should have got their magic forces together. We could have taken them down.
I have this image of you charging through the wards with like this motley crew of like spazzes behind you, all with your
With
mental
drips
powers lifting up
trailing
clipboards, like woo.
in like hospital gowns with drips and things dragging behind us.
Yeah, just all like
And just one
shuffling
person at the
along.
back, one person at the back holding on to their drip and really slowly, hang on, wait for me,
Wait for me,
shuffling along the
Jeremy.
corridor.
And then there's like
I can shoot
explosions going
fireballs.
off. You light up the oxygen lines and shit, and you hit the. Oh man, that's a movie right there.
I'll add another one in with being on a mixed ward, a separate occasion. And this wasn't seizure related. This was just in hospital for I'd broken my leg. And was it? Yeah, I'd broken my leg this one time. And oh no, this anyway, I was in hospital for another reason. And I needed to go to the bathroom, but needed assistance to go over there. Now this whole time I'd been constipated. And so it's like, I'll put up with it because I can't bother to walk across to the thing and get all the help. There's one night, it was like, oh, okay, we're ready. Get the nurse, get to the bathroom. So we're in a ward. The bathrooms are over the corridor. And she walked me across the corridor and, all the lights are on. And she takes me into the bathroom and helps me start to, get ready whilst the door to the bathroom is open to the corridor and to the ward directly opposite. And so I was on full view as she's kind of making me get onto the toilet. And I'm thinking, okay, she'll leave me in a sec. So she sits me down and stands watching. And I'm like, okay, thank you for your assistance. And she still didn't go. And I was like, can we just? And at that point, there was no stopping me. After a few days, I couldn't hold back. So there's me sitting on a toilet, having a week's worth of constipation make itself known, to an open corridor and to an open ward. And I had absolutely no say in it. Thanks for my dignity. And my only regret is that I should have maintained eye contact with her the whole time.
That's how you assert dominance.
I know, right?
Totally. So
yeah.
So I was in ward once, and so I can only fart when I lay on the ground and lift my leg up like a dog.
Robo fart.
And what was I in for? Anyway, I was in hospital and I was sick, and I hadn't done a robo fart for some time. And
right. Are we talking more than a day?
Yeah, like a couple of days it must have been or something. Because I went into that bathroom, I lay down and I farted, and I swear to God, this is not an exaggeration. It went on for at least 20 to 30 seconds.
Wow.
Non-stop, at like the sound of a sheet getting torn. Just like
as well as the physical relief, I bet you were quite amused at constant fart.
It just like, you know, when you fart and you're like, oh, it's still going. And then
Yeah.
until like 3 times, I was like, surely this must be the end. But no, it went on and on. And then I left the bathroom and no one said a fucking word, which I don't know how, like, if I had been sitting in a bed and I saw someone go into the toilet and then make a noise that I presume must have meant that they had literally shattered the porcelain with force, I would have been like, bro, do you need like a minute? Like, can I get
Yeah.
you a towel? Like,
At
fuck.
least as you come out, just a slow round of applause.
Yeah, for real.
Some
I
recognition of
expected
that.
something, but I got nothing from these bloody. Because I was always in orthopedic wards, it was all these old men don't
Yeah.
even know a good fart, and you'd think they would be into it. But
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway, so the other thing that I think is uh, uh, uh I guess point of difference would be the word, or like, you know, like experiential mountaintop, is that
Mm.
point of where your body is shutting down and you are
Yeah.
on the road. Like, we are all slowly marching towards death, but
Yay.
sometimes
Happy podcast.
so
You're
while I'm
all gonna
reminding you of
die.
your mortality after my amazing fart story, the tone is wildly shifting. But like, sometimes your body's like sprints towards it and it's like, right, we're going to start shutting shit down now. Obviously I don't need this, you know. You start throwing up your food because your body's like, let's just turn the stomach off, we're not going to need anything.
Yeah, we're done here. Why
We're
waste
done
time?
here.
It's almost like you've kind of got more priorities, like trying to breathe and have a consciousness is more important than having a sandwich.
Yeah, yeah. And it's
Yeah.
when there've been, I think, 3-ish times when I've been like a couple of days away from being fully dead. And it's not something I think you can really process when you're going through it. It's very hard to be like, oh no, I'm really, really sick. And then
Yeah, yeah.
afterwards, when you kind of get that little bit of perspective, you're like, holy shit, I almost actually died.
I think part of like that story, it feels like anecdote to me.
Mm,
Whereas to people who witnessed it must have been like, oh my God, she's dying.
mm,
Like my mum coming over to visit me because it was, it was traumatic for her and my friend who was trying to feed me because I was dying. And my dad was here at the time and his visa had run out. He tried to get his visa extended because his daughter was about to die, but he wasn't allowed to stay in the country even though I was dying. And he
oof.
had to go back to the UK. And I remember him coming to see me and on his last day, and they allowed me out of the ward to have he came with like fish and chips and a bottle of pop to go out into the hospital grounds,
Mm,
even though I was, in a wheelchair, couldn't really eat. But it was like our last bit of time together. And I remember
mm,
as he left the ward, him giving me a hug, and he'll give me a hug, but he's not, a particularly emotional man. And I could feel his tears on my arm
oh,
because he was saying his goodbyes.
yeah.
And remembering that is really weird to know that he was in that state of mind because I was dying.
Mm,
Uh, even though to me it was all like, oh, this is a crazy situation, didn't really understand the seriousness of it. So looking back, it's kind of like a movie,
mm. I think that's
like a cheesy Lifetime movie.
with the the title of our podcast is Laugh, Cry, or Die, because it's a little bit of a trite saying, but when death is, when you've been in the shadow of actually not being here anymore, it does,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
changes things, you know. And
yeah, yeah.
it also, it's not something I think that I dwell on a lot. It's not something that I'm like, oh hey, remember that time I almost died.
Yes.
You don't want to sit there, but it definitely.
I don't think it changed my view on death, like in other occasions when I've had very bad experiences and got very ill. it hasn't made that easier, but it's made it more normalized, if you know what I mean. So you still have those same stresses and those same feelings, but it's like, oh fuck, here we go again. Rather than, oh my God, what the heck is happening? It's just
so the listeners won't have noticed because of the magic of time and editing, but I had COVID last week, so we didn't record. And when I first got my COVID result, I was in this real mood. I was so like shitty and annoyed, especially because I knew that I had some gigs after I was going to be clear of COVID. And I was like, oh, I'm going to feel all shitty and I have to do this stuff. And it's not fair that I have to feel terrible and still work and blah, 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 blah. And I was being a real prick. And I didn't understand where it was coming from until I kind of was like, oh, I'm really worried that I'm going to get like the lung sickness of COVID and I'm going to start dying again. And I was didn't want that, because my friend had told me the story about how she was at home and she was just like percussing her lungs and expressing fluids and stuff. And yeah, and I was, and in my head, because every time something happens to me, it always, it doesn't, but that's kind of what's been conditioned, is that it will always end up in this really extreme place rather than being like, oh, I'm a bit sick, I'll get better. It's like, no, something's happened to me. It's going to go 7 steps past what everyone else has to go through. And I'm just have to grin and bear it.
Because you've witnessed that in other areas. And so it's like, of course things are going to go to that far because it has in the past.
Yeah, that's my expected pattern. And so I had this for, it's most of a day that I was a total asshole to like my whole family. That and it was just this stress, like, oh no, because I'm worried about going to Dead Town again. It doesn't feel very nice.
It's
heavy.
Well, we go back to the excuse me, the execution is that when you have become that close to things, I'd come close to actually dying and also mentally having it ended for me, that your outlook is that it could happen at any time.
Yeah. And it's like, there was a thing talking about how for the Victorians, you never talked about sex, but death was a very common discussion because it happened so much more often. Kids were always dying, typhoid and this and that. And like death was an accepted part of life, but God forbid you fuck, Whereas with modern society,
it was really important. It was really important for them to fuck more because the kids kept dying. Make some more, quick! Come on, let's pump another one out.
Keep it up. Whereas in modern society, all the top 20 songs are about banging. Like sex sells and advertising and all that stuff. But death is this totally undiscussed, not for polite dinner table conversation topic. And I think
we're all going to die, but we're not all going to fuck.
Yeah, especially not you with that minging face. Or Hugh, that stuck up cunt.
He wanted me.
His education was in being horny. And it's funny with so Anna, our guest of the pod with terminal cancer, her discussions are even harder than ours because they'll be like, oh, she's like, oh yeah, I've got terminal cancer. And just the like stone. I was out at a bar with her and we were talking to some randos that we were chatting with, and she's like, oh yeah, terminal cancer. And everyone was very, had this kind of cheery, it was this really weird vibe that just kind of came over everything because that death had been mentioned.
And like her acceptance of that, obviously, that's always going to be a hard thing to accept, but her acceptance of it, other people around her would want to show that same acceptance, but they don't actually feel that, and so it's awkward because they're trying to be a way that they don't actually feel, and nobody wants
that's the thing, is that there's this weird kind of ingenuineness that kind of creeps in because people just don't know what the fuck to say.
So trying to take their lead from.
And this chick we were talking to was like, oh, is she? And then kind of like had this, oh, is she okay? Is everything really okay? And it's like, no, she's we're out partying because it's fun, and
Yeah, yeah.
you know,
Well,
we
see,
want to
as
have.
well, I think our situations make us more comfortable with talking about that stuff. Like with Anna, another friend of ours, we were making a film. We've done the first part of it. But he was asking me, who do we want for this role? And I said, well, Anna would be perfect for that. And I said, the proviso is we have to film all her stuff first because she's going to die. And
Mm,
we don't want to get halfway through filming and go, oh, shit, we've got to start again because Anna's popped her clogs.
fucking
And
inconvenient bitch.
I know, right? And he was like, shit, you're harsh. And it's like, oh, come on, it's the reality. And so a couple of weeks later, I said to her, oh, yeah, I'm glad you got that part. And, told Jeff that we've got to get all your bits done first. And she was absolutely fine with that because it was reality.
Mm.
Other people are kind of like, well, you can't say that. And it's like, oh, we've got to keep this secret that we can't mention it. And she knows full well it's not a surprise to her. It's like, what? I'm going to die? So her acceptance of it is hard for the people, apart from people who have got an idea and an understanding of what that feels like.
Yeah, and it's why I don't like we said at the beginning of the show, is I find people hard.
Yeah, yeah.
Like there are vanishingly few people that I can be really like properly genuine with.
Yes, yeah.
I'm pretty good at chatting and being friendly and having a laugh, but that like there's always, or I feel like there's always like this, my closet of misery that you
Yes,
have to
yeah.
put a blanket over it so you can talk to people and be in quote unquote polite society.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is what with me, like people often say, oh, you're so strong. And I feel like a complete imposter because they get the impression that I'm so strong because you can't be asked to tell people all the time, actually, this is fucking difficult. People
Mm.
don't want to hear that and say, like, oh, yeah, I had seizure, you know how it is, yeah, everything's fine. So they do see this strong strength, coming through. And, kind of sometimes there is, but there feels like that that imposter. So when oh, he's so strong, and it's like, little do they know that I'm not that strong.
I spent 3 hours crying into my pillow last night.
Yeah, yeah. And so I mean, it's a compliment, and I'm very glad that that's the impression outside of my house that people have of me.
Mm.
And I guess in a way, without bigging ourselves up, we do have a certain amount of strength, but through necessity.
I would argue that we have profound strength.
Mm,
And I think part of the disconnect that we get is like we've had all these traumas, right? But other
mm,
people have their own traumas, and the
yeah,
suffering that they get from that trauma is just as valid as ours. But it seems like we have this outmoded, weightlifting capability because of the like visual extremity of what's happened to us, with your black eyes or your broken legs or your
yeah, yeah,
multiple concussions. Whereas someone who's got panic attacks or agoraphobia or like severe anxiety or any of these other, or just worrying about, does my husband really love me, those
yeah, yeah.
things stop them in their tracks so much.
Very debilitating.
Very
Yeah,
debilitating. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Whereas with our situations, I find I have less of those kinds of worries. I had a lot of
Mhm.
anxiety until I died.
Right, yeah, yeah.
It's like,
And
what's the worst that can happen? Well, it could be that one time I almost died. Okay, cool. It's not going to be quite that bad.
yeah, yeah. And I suppose to us with our things like day to day, they're, that invisible disability, but we do have the moments of, hey, look how fucked I am. So like when I have a
Mm,
seizure, people can see that things are wrong. But and so we get that sympathy and we get that support and we get that sort of awareness and we can talk about stuff. But for people who are suffering with mental illnesses and mental issues and full-time stress,
mm,
they don't get that support
mm,
because they would have to go, hey, look, I'm having a problem.
mm,
And that's hard to say to people. Whereas when you've got something obvious, people can bring it up to you as,
mm.
and say you're the receipt in receipt of that.
And I think that, like, even though like I said before, fucking people. But there is like an element of compassion that I'm more able to have having gone through as much as I have, because I have suffered so
100%,
profoundly,
100%. And
But
I'll stop you on that one for we are going to talk more about the positives and negatives, and that very much is part of that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think that's probably a good place to end the episode. Well, thank you for your story, Nay. I think it's led us to some interesting little post chats, and always it's hilarious to hear stories of you butt ass naked scuttling around like a crab.
Yes. Yeah, I like that.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for listening, and check us out on our Patreon, on Facebook, on the Twits, on Insta Spam.
You're not that cool. Don't try.
Can I say YOLO, or is that still?
Please do not say that.
I'm gonna start using more Gen Z buzzwords in the podcast.
Yeah, because we're down with the youth. We're cool.
Word, because that's what 20-year-olds really want to hear about, is people who've been in hospital. That's what's hot. That's the rage. You know what our market segment is like 60-year-old people who've broken hips who are like, yeah, I fucking know what they're on about.
Yeah, it's not teenagers in the schoolyard, is it, really?
Not so much. Anyway, thank you guys for listening. It's been Steve and Nay, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.